you saying, man? Amigo.
6,200.
Man, you're killing me, man.
Tonight, heartbreak in Mexico City at the scene of last night's deadly train collapse.
What's up, guys? It's Jason here, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Expat Insight. We take a break from my usual business Rise and Fall series to go over to the country below the United States, Mexico. Mexico is one of the most dynamic, fun, and beautiful places in the world, but if you're an American living in Mexico, you might consider moving out right now. Or if you're thinking about moving to Mexico, here are the top 8 reasons to avoid moving to Mexico. By the end of this video, you'll know why you should not move to Mexico or why you should at least try and avoid Mexico. Let me know, should I make a video about the top reasons to go to Mexico? Let me know with the comment below. I always do my best to respond. Now, let's get started, shall we? Reason number 1, coronavirus. You know how the QAnons don't really put on the mask? Yeah, that's pretty much all of Mexico. Must be the weed. Or the Pope. So yeah, if there's a zombie apocalypse after Pfizer, it will probably not hit Mexico too bad. You do the math, amigo. The US State Department has decreed that travelers to Mexico may experience border closures, airport closures, travel prohibitions, stay-at-home orders, business closures, and other emergency conditions within Mexico due to COVID-19. They've also made some rules for government employees traveling to Mexico, including US government employees may not travel between cities after dark, may not hail taxis on the streets, and must rely on dispatched vehicles, including from app-based services like Uber or from regulated taxi stands. US government employees may not drive from the US-Mexico border to or from the interior parts of Mexico, with the exception of daytime travel within Baja California between Nogales and Hermosillo on Mexico Federal Highway 15D and between Nuevo Laredo and Monterrey on Highway 85D. Now, government employees tend to make the simplest things difficult to do to government regulations which limit what they can and can't do, but ask yourself this: why doesn't the US government want you to hail a taxi in Mexico? What do they know that we don't? Reason number 2, the crime. It is not a joke. Criminal cartels are in control of many small towns and even some small cities. They also have a huge impact on the larger cities, and they are colluded with the government, local police, state police, and even members of the federal police and armed forces. If you're a victim of a crime in Mexico, it is very unlikely that you will receive any kind of justice, and sadly, this is not going to change anytime soon. Traditional justice seems to be a bloody thing indeed, but effective to keep the peace. And then there is the USA. The part of the drug war in Mexico that most Americans forget is that the big money is actually made in the US, not Mexico. So the Mexican cartels have their tendrils deep in most big cities of the US, like Portland, Minneapolis, and of course, Miami. That means that if you do get into a scrape with a cartel for whatever reason, your family back home is most certainly not safe from them. Cartels usually target their enemies' families because it works better to intimidate them. Nobody is really safe. Most of the small and medium-sized businesses are actually controlled by the mafia in Mexico. The mafia also has numerous businesses and properties in the US. They have eyes everywhere. It is also important to distinguish between rich criminals who are mostly risk-averse and criminals who are just extremely poor and do stuff like armed robbery or breaking and entering. For the poorer criminals, their crimes would be entirely based on opportunity. If you're foolish enough to display your wealth in Mexico, you will definitely attract unwanted attention from folks just trying to make a good payday with a pistola. They're dangerous, but not nearly as dangerous as the really wealthy career criminals, many of whom are utterly adverse to risk, but whom you must avoid at all costs. These evil masterminds will probably be governors, mayors, high-ranking police officials, or captains of industry. They will usually go around with an escort, have girlfriends a quarter their age, and the worst part? You can find them all over the world in the best resorts. Their children probably go to school in Europe. These criminals will not be obvious about their activities. They will dress well, be friendly and sociable, but will also be happy to have you eaten by alligators in their private basement if you decide to go up against them. The danger of these criminals is that they are extremely common, owning most of the government posts and big companies in the country. We have this kind of monster in the USA too, but they're a little harder to find, and they go through many loops to stay clear off the radar of ordinary people. In Mexico, that's a different story. Americans have been killed staying at Airbnbs in Mexico, and nothing's been done about it. Which brings me to the next reason. Reason number 3, corrupt cops. Here is a common occurrence in all parts of Mexico. You're driving down the highway when you're pulled off the road by a cop. You sigh because you were not doing anything particularly dangerous and all your papers are in order. Then the cop asks you to step out of the car. You do so and you give him all your documents. He tells you that you were speeding and he has to give you a ticket. When you shrug your shoulders and get ready to accept your ticket, you notice he is not really wanting to write you a ticket and seems somehow disappointed. At this point, you should know that you would have been better off to offer a bribe. But it's too late, and suddenly he's holding a bag of cocaine and he says he's going to take you to jail. Where did the coke come from? Why, the cop's pocket, of course, but how can you prove it? You are some poor American student on spring break. Once you get to the station, you have to post a small fortune to post bail. Most Americans who have lived a long time in Mexico know better. They will simply offer the mordida, slang for bribe, which in Spanish means bite and be done with it, always saving a little money on a speeding ticket. But as times get harder, police corruption gets worse, and it is so utterly ingrained in the Mexican way of life that trying to avoid it is almost impossible. The mordida is part and parcel of doing business in Mexico, and it works in all aspects of business and private life. You want a permit for a new taco stand in the city? Mordida. You want to get out of a sticky legal problem? Mordida. Need to get someone out of jail fast? Mordida. Everybody has a price, and if you can pay the right price, you'll be able to circumvent most of the tedious government rules because, as everybody knows, in Mexico, the government is the mafia. The funny thing about this system is that most cops are actually quite decent, breaking up fights between drunks, trying to catch murderers and rapists, doing police work. But when it comes to the mordida, usually that comes from the higher ranks, so it's almost a given that you won't get away from the Mexican police if they really want to take a bite out of your wallet. Speaking of taking a bite, how about you make sure you take a bite out of that subscribe button and, take a little nibble out of the notification bell too. Reason number 4, pollution. Environmental regulations and Mexicans don't get along. Just take a drive down Mexico City and you will be in one of the most polluted cities in the world. The number 1 spot for most polluted is hotly contested between India and China, but Mexico is certainly no stranger to smog, landfills, toxic rivers, and an assortment of other environmental problems. Again, the source of most of the pollution is the insane number of vehicles in use, especially in the big cities. But the fact that most of these vehicles would not pass even the simplest clean air standards make the smog in the big cities dangerously venomous for the human body. There is a large amount of evidence that associates the great amount of lead in the air in Mexico City to mental retardation, decreased fertility, pulmonary disease, and many other problems. As we discussed in other episodes, the problem of clean water access in Mexico City is not going to go away soon. If you live in certain parts of the city, if you turn on the faucet, you will get a malodorous, yellowish to brown water that is not fit for human consumption. And it's not even fit for washing vegetables. Another aspect of the pollution problem in Mexico has to do with the very low budgets designated to cleaning up cities and towns, so it's not unusual to see garbage everywhere, and where there is garbage, there are diseases, rats, and cockroaches. Reason number 5, human trafficking. Slavery is alive and well in Mexico. If you're a very pretty woman, you might want to reconsider the place you live. The sad fact is that Mexico is one of the most dangerous places to be a woman. After weapons and drugs, human trafficking is one of the most profitable businesses for the many crime cartels operating in Mexico. Although most of the folks trafficked are usually from lower-income Mexican families, pretty girls are particularly vulnerable targets regardless of their background. Human traffickers are not generally violent at first. A young, handsome man will try to seduce his victim with all manner of promises. There might be a job offer. Then, the criminal will try to take his target to some other town, usually Mexico City, where most of the serious trafficking occurs. Once the victim is taken away from her family and friends, then the violence begins. It's an old and nefarious formula, but it works well. Many of the girls who are trafficked are Eastern European, Asian, or even American. The cartels have a very detailed profile for their preferred marks, usually poor, from broken families, and little education. But again, it is important to understand that nobody is really safe. Add to this the fact that some cartels don't really want a living human, but only their organs. There is a large market for replacement livers, hearts, lungs. Very well-organized criminals will kidnap people based on their blood type, and the folks buying the organs will pay enormous sums to save their own lives with a freshly extracted, robbed body part. Reason number 6, failing infrastructure. The recent collapse of the Golden Metro line in Mexico City brings us to another very dangerous and problematic fact about living in Mexico: decaying or substandard infrastructure. We have already spoken about the water problems you will face living in the city. But water is not the only victim of corrupt government deals and lack of funding for basic services in the cities. Many bridges, roads, trains, and other public structures are in dire need of repair, and many of them will not survive the inevitable next earthquake, especially in Mexico City. Public transportation is non-existent or in shambles in many cities, hospitals and schools underfunded. Some of the more critical buildings like ports, airports, and interstate highways are right down dangerous. Many public buildings were built with cheap materials or inadequate building codes. Of course, Mexico is not the only country where a metro might collapse due to lack of care or bad planning, but not all the countries in the world are as prone to sudden earthquakes as Mexico, and each time Mother Earth decides to dance, Mexican buildings tremble. The public roads are especially hazardous, and when driving from one state to another, you must be very vigilant for potholes, some of them extremely deep. Reason number 7, underfinanced medical facilities. If you get sick in Mexico, going to the hospital is actually free. But you know what they say, you get what you pay for. López Obrador got rid of the Seguro Popular, which is the free medical treatment for the uninsured, and replaced it with the Instituto de Salud para el Bienestar. Sorry if I butchered that pronunciation. It had an initial budget of 80 billion pesos, about $4 billion. However, the stark truth is that those funds started to come in slowly, and in many places, not at all. So the medical treatment that thousands of Mexicans could count on was suspended. Obrador's government had tried to make strides with their new system, but the jury is still out, and meanwhile, many clinics were forced to shut down. Another problem with medical facilities in Mexico besides being underfunded is that many of the more specialized doctors leave Mexico to go practice medicine in the much more profitable markets of the United States and Europe. The most skilled doctors have no trouble getting visas to live and work outside Mexico, and the money they can earn abroad is infinitely more than the money they can earn in Mexico. Reason number 8, failing schools. Although the UNAM, Mexican University, is actually the top Latin American university in the continent, Mexican education is still not the greatest. Mexicans with money send their kids to Europe to study, or private schools. But the government schools are actually terribly corrupt, underfunded, and sadly a huge propaganda tool for the government. Civics and history classes do not teach history to educate Mexicans about their origins, but to convince Mexicans of the importance of their government. For a culture which existed thousands of years before the arrival of the Spaniards, history classes in public schools tend to overlook this part of Mexican history and instead focus on the history that was written after the arrival of the conquistadors. Sounds a little bit familiar to some of the US textbooks erasing our Native American history. In Mexico, there was a very biased and real effort to conceal certain aspects of Mexican history, like massacres and crimes committed on indigenous populations, corrupted heroes, and of course the huge impact of the church over the centuries. At least in the US, we're starting to recognize the atrocities of our past. In addition to that, Mexican schools are behind the times, forcing students to use books instead of teaching them how to use computers. And who reads books anymore, am I right? Teachers are constantly going on strike, demanding better pay and working conditions, and often, children have no access to public schools because they live too far from any city. Education is not a priority for the government, and it shows. And that brings us to today. Please don't let us dissuade you from living in Mexico if you really love the country. Mexico surely is a magical place with wonderful people and especially delicious guacamole. How can we speak evil of the country that created guacamole? Guacamole. But when you decide to live in Mexico, you must look at all sides of the story and take care to know the disadvantages of your choice. All countries have a bit of good and a bit of bad, but it is better to be prepared than sorry. So with that said, thank you so much for watching my video. There was a significant amount of research and production that went into making this video possible. As this is a brand new YouTube channel I just started this year, if you enjoy videos like this, please click the subscribe button and hit that notification bell. I respond to all comments. If you haven't seen already, check out my video on the top 8 reasons that make Peru amazing. And let me know, should I make that follow-up video on the good sides of Mexico? As always, stay happy and healthy and stay tuned for another episode of Company Insight next week.